Hello and welcome back to the Playbase. I'm your host, Frances Fishman, and today I have a very special guest. I think I always have a special guest, but every time somebody sits in the chair across from me or over Zoom with me, I get really excited about how I met them, about the conversations we've had in the past, and why I brought them on. So today I have an incredible SLP who's new to South Florida. Her name is Dana Weiss, and Dana, we were introduced, and when we sat down to have our first conversation, I think that the conversation could have lasted days. I loved speaking with you and hearing about you and sharing the Playbase with you. So when I thought about who I wanted on this podcast, your name very easily came to mind in your face. So I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you. Definitely when we had that first conversation, I got off the phone and I went to my husband and I was like, I met someone that's like me in Florida. This is amazing. So I definitely agree. We really connected, and I'm so excited to be here.
I think our fields, they collide very often. And in the speech and language pathology field, similar to the ABA field, I think things are done differently based on who you work with, right? So there's an idea or ideology behind everything that we all do. And then it's the implementer who brings their own, what I like to say, their own magic, their own light, their own gift. And there's a unique, I think, energy of people who come from New York, who are used to this like high intensity, go, 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 high expectation, high performance. And they come to Florida where the sun is shining and people are more relaxed. And I think everyone I have ever met in either the education or therapy field who comes from New York comes to Florida and says, what is happening here? It is a totally different energy here, which can be a really beautiful thing and sometimes can be a really shocking thing to experience. Can you speak to a little bit of your experience transitioning from New York, which is, I mean, there were two places in the world. I grew up in Canada, in Toronto, and there were two places I always imagined myself living. One was Los Angeles or California, not Los Angeles specifically. I think more San Francisco or San Diego. But it was always California and for sure New York. I was like, I'm going to live in New York. I'm going to be a dance therapist. I'm going to live in Manhattan. I'm going to live the life, which sounds so amazing. But now living in Boca, I'm like, what was I thinking? Like, this is the life. I love it here. So to have this contrast, which is a huge contrast, I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience transitioning both as a human being who got married recently.
Yes.
That's so very exciting.
Thank you.
But also as a clinician moving into a totally different, I don't want to say necessarily a culture, but dynamic of people and expectation. What has that been like for you?
So in terms of the clinic world, when I was in Manhattan, I was in New York City. I did my training there, and I was all over the Bronx for different externships, and then I got a job working in the Bronx and Manhattan. I was in both locations for my clinical fellowship, and it was definitely very different. In New York, there's a lot more salaried positions to work in clinics. So I was there, and the clients would come to me, or our patients would come to us. I would see them in my office. I had a supervisor. Everything was very much, done as a big cohesive group. Yeah. And then when I transitioned down to Florida, there was not many salaried positions unless you were in the school system, which at the time I had only done clinic work. And so I was really looking to be in a clinic. And so it was a little bit of a big transition trying to go from having that salary to then being, paid per client and trying to build up from there. But what I will say is because there's more independence in Florida, I was able to start my practice.
That's really cool.
I don't think I ever would have gotten the opportunity or had the guts to necessarily go out on my own because I was so comfortable where I was and I absolutely loved it. And then coming here, I was like, I see a need for something that I bring differently. And I trusted my gut and I said, I am, I think that I'm great at what I do and I think I can bring an impact into the kids, into their homes, into their schools. And so instead of being in the clinic where they were coming to me, I left that role and I started my own, which was very cool.
That is not only cool, I think it's actually really brave. And sometimes when you get put in a position where you have no other choice, when we were looking at visas to immigrate from Toronto to Canada to the United States, my husband and I were looking at different opportunities, like what could we do? And I said to him, I could never work for another ABA company, especially being the CEO of a company and having a very unique approach. I said, I can't go work somewhere else where I'd be expected to implement therapy their way.
Agreed.
And I said, and if our visa to stay in the United States was dependent on me continuing that, we wouldn't last very long, or I would be a very miserable version of myself, because that's the reality. The reality is that when I did work under somebody else's supervision whose method did not align, like really didn't align with my soul, didn't align with my heart, with my, not only like my being, but like my knowledge as well. And what I had experienced, it was really hard for me. So that put me in a position at that time when my, the psychologist who trained me, when she left, and I was left with, you either go work for somebody else for whom you may not align with their method, or you be brave, you be courageous. You take a bold step and you start your own practice. You figure it out for yourself, because when you go to school, you don't learn business. I didn't learn anything about business. I thankfully am married to somebody who worked in business since he was probably too young to work, but helped manage family businesses, worked in business, bought and sold businesses, built businesses from the ground up and sold them. Like, he just understands business, which allows for me to have, an unpaid consultant.
Same. That is what I do.
And it makes a world of a difference, because our education lent us to being incredible clinicians. Our life path, our life experience, our education, our clinical practice was never like, how do you run a business? Never. It was, how do you treat, or how do you support, or how do you teach, or how do you, heal the people that you're working with? Exactly. Not how do you then run a business to do that? So I commend you, because yes, you and I were both put in a position where like, you either do something that makes your heart unhappy, or you take a big leap of faith and you start your own practice. And I think as a clinician, that is the scariest thing to do, because your entire history in your field, you've had someone to turn to. Someone who deals with certain things, somebody who brings the clients in, somebody who can answer, somebody to answer your questions. And then in the end, you're like, oh, it's me. And for that, it's me. And for that, it's me. And when I don't know, it's still me.
I'm still calling myself here. I can't phone a friend, like calling myself to figure out what's the answer to how I can fix the situation, or fix someone's, meet their needs in a different way. So I feel that for sure, because it's hard. It's you. Everything is, it's good to have a basis of clinicians around you, and so you can lean on them, but everything is definitely on you. You don't have a supervisor to go to. You have to be the one coming up with the creative ways to best support your clients.
Yes. And I mean, the Play Base has multiple clinicians working under my supervision and under the BCBA's supervision. But for me, especially when I first started, I was a one-woman show like you. It was, I am the Play Base. Welcome. My name is Frances Fishman. I am. And I also had to learn, and I don't know if this is something that has hit you yet or something that you've experienced yet, but to separate my identity from me as a clinician and me as a business owner. Like, I've had to have people over the years explain to me, Frances, you in fact are not the Play Base. The Play Base is your baby, is something that you are the CEO, you are the creator, you are in charge of, but it is not you. So when something happens within the Play Base or to the Play Base, it's not necessarily happening. Like, to be able to separate that is really hard. Is that something you struggle with at all?
I would say because I'm working with more individual families, there hasn't been anything necessarily catastrophic or big that has happened that I'm like, oh my gosh, this is me. However, if I do have a session where I'm like, oh, I really, I wanted to implement this technique, but there wasn't enough time, it's hard to not take that home with you and to think about your client and to think about how you can best support them and, continue researching. It's like important to find time for yourself. So that's definitely important. But going back to New York City, I had a wonderful support there when I was working in the clinic, and they were really wonderful. And they had all these great, they always said, make sure you're taking time for yourself and taking time because you have to be having time for yourself in order to have the time to best support your clients while you're in the session. So I kind of tried to transfer that over with me when I started on my own.
I think that's actually a really beautiful gift you were given, because if I think about BCBAs that I know, for instance, like behavior analysts are notorious for not considering themselves and overworking themselves, and they'll take on 100 clients, or they'll take on, like, sometimes I'm like, I have an analyst that works at so many like different organizations, and I'm like, how do you find time for yourself? How do you engage in the self-care that you need in order to show up the way that you do? And I think that is such an important and also missed area. I actually remember about 4 years ago doing my CEUs, my continuing education credits, and finding one that was about burnout and how to avoid burnout and self-care. And I was like, oh, this is so beautiful that they're offering this, because this is not talked about enough. And it's so true. Like when I train educators or therapists, I talk about this all the time. I don't always practice the same way that I preach, but it's a work in progress. And I very much empathize with this idea of taking your work home with you, because your work means so much to you. Mm-hmm. Going back to your work, you mentioned that when you came here, you felt like, I offer something different, which I very much I connect to that deeply, to the point where I think I told you this in our first conversation, that when I met people here before we even moved, when we were just thinking about moving, and I shared with them how I implement the science of behavior, everyone, like literally everyone who understood what I said to me, oh, we need you here. And I remember being like, I heard the same sentence over and over and over from so many different people, to the point where I was like, what? Why? And then I got here and I was like, oh, okay.
Understood.
And yes, I learned things like the F in Florida stands for fraud. And if you're going to get Medicaid accredited in Florida, make sure that maybe you don't, or maybe you do, because there has been so much fraud within the government system that helps people get the support, that now they question every human offering support. And I understand it is crazy. It is the Wild West. It is the Wild West here.
Wild South.
Yeah, the Wild South Florida. I don't know about all of Florida. I know what South Florida has been like. There are some incredible practitioners and clinicians, incredible business owners with deep-rooted passion who are here to make a difference. Mm-hmm. And there are clearly ones who are not. But I'd love to hear what you do differently.
So I come from an incredible background. In New York City, I worked for a major nonprofit where I worked with kids and adults with disabilities. So, very young, all the way up to people in their 80s, and all of them had either intellectual disabilities, or they were autistic, or they had Down syndrome, and I worked with all different abilities. And I met some of the most incredible humans that I worked with, and then also my clients as well. And I learned so much from the clients that I worked with. And because a lot of them were adults, they were able to share their insights into what therapy was like, and what about what I did was different that they liked, and they would come to each session so excited, like running through the doors.
Wow.
And I took, a lot of what's really important is we have to take from adults that have been in therapy and implement. So the way I work with I work with solely children, 0 to 21. And I take what's most important to me is meeting the person or the kid where they are. I don't want to implement something if a kid isn't comfortable yet. I did a screener like 2 days ago. I went to the person's house, and the kid was really shy, and he was a little bit upset. And so I said, okay, before we, start going through and saying sounds, let's play the fish game. So I pulled out my fishing game, and I'm like, let's get comfortable first. Let's meet the person where they are, because if we are not safe in our mind and our body and feeling comfortable, then there's no way that we're going to make progress or make that connection. And that connection comes before anything you can do when it comes to therapy.
And this is somewhere where we really align and I think really connected was traditionally therapy's goal, right? The goal of every therapist is progression. Like, how are we going to progress? How are we going to improve? How are we going to change? We want to see that graph. We want to see all of that information. We want to hear the words. We want to and we want to see it fast. We want all of it yesterday. And when people see our approach, sometimes they're like, but you're not doing any therapy because my child isn't doing anything right now. And if you really think about it, what you're doing when you're playing that fish game is beyond more important than anything you will teach, because you can't get to the teaching unless you become, oh my God, Dana's here.
Exactly.
And not, here she comes.
Oh, I have to say my sounds today.
Yes.
That's not what we want. We want excitement. And I think it's also important to understand that kids are just like adults. We have days where we're not feeling our best. Mm-hmm. They have days where they're not feeling their best. And meeting the kids where they are on those days and still making progress, but meeting them and saying, hey, I see that you're feeling a little tired today. Maybe instead of doing, this activity, what's something else that we can do, or we can still make progress and still work together, but getting their input into the sessions and doing it playfully and doing it fun while still getting everything we need to get is kind of the best way, because we want them to feel safe and comfortable when we're there.
There's, in the field of ABA specifically, there's a lot of talk around assent and consent and changing the field to having the child wanting to engage in the therapy as opposed to forcing the child to sit at a table and run trials all day. And I'm very happy about that shift that's happening. I don't know that it's happening in practice in many places, but it's being talked about, which is a first step, to change. And I remember meeting an SLP when I first moved here and explained that we do ABA in a play-based way. And she was like, well, how else would you work with kids? And I thought that it was shocking when I was like, have you ever seen how ABA is implemented? And she was like, no, but if you're working with kids, like it was like a no-brainer to her, but it's not a no-brainer to everybody. And, in the field of speech, you often have a 30 to 60 minute window with a child. Yes. And then you're done. Your session is done. Whereas in ABA, you can have a 3-hour window. You can have a 7-hour window. And so you have more time to fit in that play, I hope. You have a lot more time to do that. Do you find that when you're working, that you have any pushback from other therapists or parents, or no, that's beautiful?
I think that the biggest thing for me, even when I'm with the parents in their home, I like to involve them as much as possible. If I'm working with a 2-year-old, the family's in there, they're learning the techniques and I'm helping them. If I'm in the school, I'm involving the people that need to be involved, whether it's the teacher or I'm giving the parents their little notes home. I don't get much pushback because I do get results. The thing is, we don't need to sit at a table with a sticker chart, or I don't know if you use like the rewards charts.
Token economies.
Yeah.
Sometimes, yeah. Depends on the kid.
Depending on the kid.
Yep.
But I typically, for speech, don't use those that frequently because I feel that I don't need that. I need intrinsic motivation.
Yes. So okay, wait. Because not everyone listening knows what that means. Okay. And that is a beautiful behavioral term. I don't know if you knew that. Yes. It is a behavioral term. Can you tell me, do you know the, absolutely, tell me, what is what is intrinsic motivation and why is that what you want?
So intrinsic motivation comes from inside. It's our kids, our adults, the people that we're supporting, wanting to do the activity, wanting to get better, wanting to improve. And they don't even half the time know exactly what it is they're, depending on their age. So my older kids, my 4th graders, my 5th graders, they know what we're working on. But the younger ones, we want them to come in and have that motivation to want to do it inside. And sometimes, there's that extrinsic motivation. Oh, if you do X, I'll give you Y. And that doesn't lead to the strongest carryover. It leads to not wanting to do it because it feels like you're only doing it for that reward. So we want the reward to be that internal, being proud, feeling good, leaving that session where I'm saying, you worked so hard, or we did so much, you played so well, I'm so proud of you, give me a high five. So having that yes, I'm giving them external motivators in my words, but also them feeling really good about themselves internally and wanting to come back and do it all over again.
I have this core memory of a client of mine who was doing something that was really hard for him. And when he finished, he looked up and he said, Francis, I did it.
Yes.
And I was like, I was like, don't cry. But yeah, like that's it. That feeling of I did it.
Yeah.
Is the most impactful motivator to feel good about doing it.
Yes.
In order to feel good about doing it, you need to feel good to do it.
Yes.
You need to not feel forced. You shouldn't feel like I'm trying to correct something that's wrong with me. I'm innately wrong or bad for the way that I am. I'm learning something, or I'm doing something and this is hard and I'm gritty and I'm going to be able to get through it. And oh my God, I did it.
Yes.
And so in ABA, we use both systems of motivation. We use intrinsic, which is that like I do it because it feels good. And we use the extrinsic because sometimes there is no intrinsic.
Yes.
And depending on what we're working on, if there is no intrinsic, we need to build that intrinsic using extrinsic. And when you're working with a kid, like I know my daughter, when she was 3, my youngest, had speech. She had the cutest lisp. Like, the cutest baby talk. But I was like, okay, it's time. It's time to not sound like a baby. It's time for everyone to understand the words coming out of your mouth. And she felt so good. She would come home and be like, listen to what I can say.
Yeah.
And now we look back at videos and she's like, wow. Like, and I miss that, not because I want her to sound that way, because it's so cute, but the pride she had in being able to say words and have people understand what she said and to say them the way everyone else said them made her feel so good about herself and gave her such confidence.
Yeah.
I think speech is such a gift to give because we know a lot of behavior stems from either a skill deficit in being able to communicate a want or a need, or there are some people for whom that communication is not going to be spoken word. It'll be a different type of communication, or at least for a time being. But not being able to communicate what I want or need, or that I need you to stop, or I need this to stop. And to exist in a world where nobody understands me, or only my mom or my dad or my nanny or my teacher understands me, but nobody else does, is so... like I can feel it in my heart. It's so frustrating to walk through the world and nobody knows.
Yeah.
So it's such a gift.
Thank you.
It is such a gift to give the ability to communicate to somebody who either struggled to communicate, struggled to understand communication and process communication, or to be able to then have this exchange where, oh, wow, I get it. And they get me.
And I would love to just kind of give an overview because I'm not sure everyone knows exactly what speech language therapy is. Mm-hmm. Most people think that, and by the way, thank you. I appreciate your kind words, but we do what we do because we love it.
Yeah.
But just to give an overview, because a lot of the people I run into often think, oh, you do lisp, you work on the R sound, you work on the L sound, and granted, that is a lot of that in what I do, and I absolutely love doing that. But speech therapists also work with AAC devices. You were talking about different forms of communication. So,
can you tell us a little bit what that is?
So an AAC device is an augmentative alternative communication device, MANGO. Augmentative alternative communication device. And it's a device often seen on an iPad or another tablet in which the client or the person will use buttons to communicate. So it'll be like, I like chicken or whatever it is that they're wanting or liking. And so the first thing I do with those clients is I teach them to use it to get their wants and needs out. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite buttons is I have something to say. Like, listen to me, I have something to say.
Oh, I love that.
Which is actually something that I'm working on right now with one of my kids that I'm seeing. But getting them to be able to, communicate those, also the basic needs. Like, some of them need help going to the bathroom and they can't go on their own, so I need to go to the bathroom, or just different things. Mm-hmm. But so that's one of the things that speech therapists do. Another thing that I personally love working on is language. We do a lot of how you talk, not just, in infants who are not talking yet, but also third graders, fourth graders, fifth graders, all the way up through high school. They don't necessarily understand the right grammar to use or how to get the words out. And then the same thing the other way, the understanding of speech, reading comprehension. And then it starts to affect when they start doing math problems and they're doing those written math problems and or following directions in the classroom. Put your pencil down and then go pick up your water bottle. They might do it the opposite way because they didn't comprehend it correctly. And my most recent thing that I'm absolutely loving is executive functioning. So that's something I've recently gotten into, which I've been working with a lot of my older kids with and some of the younger ones. But executive functioning is the way that our brain works in order to function properly and smoothly. So for instance, we have our working memory, our ability to remember something while we're doing another task, or we've got our ability to organize ourselves or to sequence things. So with some of the older school-age kids, we work on, again, that working memory, recalling certain things in paragraphs or recalling things within the classroom that we're supposed to be doing, our emotional regulation, not getting, up to a 10 when we should really, be at a 5 over certain things. So speech therapy works on all of that because it's not just our mouth, it's our brain, it's our cognition. And so that's just a word for, about speech therapy. We really need a bigger name, but it would be like 10 words long because there's so many things that we do.
I think equally, when people think about OT, for instance, they think about sitting at a table and writing. So because in school, OTs often work on writing skills.
Handwriting, yeah.
Yes, handwriting. But it is so much more than that. And there's also, self-regulation in there. A lot of the fields, like these 3 fields specifically, OT, speech, and behavior, overlap over some of the different goals, which is why I love working on teams. Yes. I love when we get to work with a speech and language pathologist, we get to work with an OT with a client, and then all collaborate because some of our goals are gonna, if not all of them, overlap. Absolutely. And they depend on each other. So if I'm working on behavior while you're working on, expressive communication, which is the spoken word or communicating with an AAC device, that is something that we can work on together because being able to communicate will eliminate my need for some of my behavior, if not the majority of it. So working on it together is the most beautiful approach. I remember early in my career, probably for the first 7 years of my career, I worked on a particular case. I worked with multiple clients, but there was a particular case where mom managed the clinical team. And she had us all on an email. She had the teachers of that year on that email. And I had to write a note at the end of every day, and at the end of every speech session or OT session, they would write a note. And so we were communicating all the time. And so before, the SLP would see my client, they'd read my note about how the day went.
Yes.
And then they would have insight as to some of the struggles, or not even the day, but the week, some of the struggles that this child is experiencing socially at school, which then led her to understand that he's not understanding some of the social dynamics, some of the nuances in language and in communication, like sarcasm.
Yeah.
Or intention, because if I think everyone's intention is to harm me, or everyone's intention is against whatever the experience is, even if you're not communicating in that way, because I don't understand the intention, it makes the whole communication broken. Right. And so I think that is such a beautiful collaboration. Yes. Because what she ended up telling my client is that her and I were best friends and that we spoke every day. And so she's like, I spoke to my best friend Frances today.
That's the sweetest.
And that's how she would communicate that she knew that the other day, shit kind of hit the fan, and I'm going to help you with this because I think there was a misunderstanding, and let me support you with that. Yeah. And it allows for the effectiveness of treatment and of support.
Yes.
To 100 times more effective because we're all working together.
It's the most important thing.
And I feel like in therapy in general, everyone kind of works in their own bubble, and you have to bring people together. I recently had a team meeting with an OT, and the OT with the analyst and with me worked together on specific goals and on how we're going to communicate and how we're going to support this client. And it was why didn't we do this before? Why did we wait so long? And then it reminded me of the importance of this, how incredibly important it is for us to work together as a team. And I think that I've learned so much from the SLPs that I've worked with over the years. And I'm sure that you've collaborated with, analysts and RBTs over the years that have taught you different.
Much.
Yes. It makes such a difference in your practice because in the end, you have a behavioral lens to what's happening while you're having a speech lens, and it allows you to understand what's happening in a much more deep-rooted way.
Absolutely, yes.
Which allows for you to intervene or be more proactive because maybe you have a client who has little to no intrinsic motivation, no interest in certain things, no interest in the social dynamic, and then you bring in this new person and you're like, oh, but the behavioral team, or I've seen a behavior analyst support a child in this way when I had zero idea what motive. Like sometimes I have people come and we're like, what is this child like? And they're like, nothing. I'm like, what? What do you mean nothing? You don't know? And then it was like, how do I figure that out?
And how do we do it together? Because the RBTs and the BCBAs are with them more frequently.
Yes.
So every time that there's an RBT in my session, which is pretty frequent, I'm like, tell me about the day. How are we doing? How's it going? Are we having a good day? Are we having a harder day? Like, are we, I have trained for in sensory needs for speech therapy. So if they're having some sensory needs, do we need to, move around a bit, or do we need to sit down? Like, what do we need to do to get ourselves regulated and ready to learn and ready to go? So I've definitely taken away from a lot of the RBTs that I've worked with some really good strategies and also so much more insight into that particular kiddo or client that I'm working with because they know them so well because they're with them
all day.
Sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes a world of a difference. I wanted to ask you, since moving to South Florida, building your business, seeing clients, is there anything that's changed about you or about your practice that you can and maybe you don't know because maybe you haven't had the time to sit and think about it since you haven't been here that long. But is there something that you feel stepping into this role, being out on your own, is there something about you that has changed or that you've learned or that you've grown in some way?
I think that it's definitely a hard question, but coming to Florida, I absolutely love it here. I think it's the best thing I've ever done. I would not love New York City, but I would not go back unless it's for a short visit to see some of my friends and family.
Same.
Don't really need to go back and live there. And I think I've learned to kind of slow down and enjoy. And I used to, keep note of the things that made me laugh in my sessions and all the stuff because life was so much different in New York City. But here in Florida, I don't need to keep note of that because things are good and everything was great there. But being outside and having all of that, it makes you reflect a little bit easier rather than being on the subway for many, many stops going home. And, you're not thinking the positive things because you're tired or you're upset. But here you drive home and you drive along a road of palm trees. And so I think I've grown in getting the time to slow down and really reflect on all the really great things that my clients are doing. And I've also grown in my confidence. A lot of the times in the past, I felt like I had to, call a friend, call a supervisor. And I do think it's really important if you don't know to go out and learn, to speak to other people. But I trust myself now, and I see the growth my clients have made and their families and the connections we've built. And I feel just much more confident. I find that being in Florida, I feel like it's my place, having my business, it just feels so right. And it's just the biggest blessing. And I just feel so much more positive here, even though I did love my life there. I loved my job, but I feel like with all the green, it's harder to not be positive here.
I always say when people ask me about, would you go back? I say you'd have to drag me back. You'd have to kick me out. And not because I didn't love Toronto and not because I don't miss my family and my friends and, my teammates there. I love all of them. But there's something about exactly what you said, being able to go outside on my hardest day, go outside, have access to nature, to be able to ground, which is regulating to the nervous system, having vitamin D makes a world of a difference. There's seasonal affect disorder, which is a very real thing. I know many people who suffer from it. lack of sunshine, lack of vitamin D. You're in the cold. It's gray. It's dark. It gets dark early. I remember my office was in my basement.
Yeah.
Basements are cold. Nobody knows that in Florida because there's no such thing. But basements are cold and darker because your windows are small. Mm-hmm. And so if you don't have bright lights, which are actually also not good for your nervous system, because lighting can really impact the way your brain works. Mm-hmm. If you don't have natural light, like look at these windows that they have here.
The most amazing thing about Florida is the light in the windows. And I mean, I talk about my subway experience a lot because I spent a long time on the subway, like 27 stops to get to my job.
Oh my God.
I loved the company that I worked for, and I was very passionate about getting a job there, and it trained me to be able to do what I do now. So I would not, I wouldn't take that back for a second. But I didn't have light for the hour that I was going up or back, except for the time when the subway was above ground. And so when you would go to work when it was dark out and then come back and it's already dark, like having the longer daylight here and just being able, we have huge windows because people can't see. It's absolutely incredible. I'm looking out on palm trees. I always say hug a palm tree. They're my favorite. They're just the best.
I totally agree with you. I really realized that when we bought our house. I don't know if I shared this story yet, but when we bought our house, we didn't move yet, but we closed on our house and we moved everything in. And my entire Toronto team, or the majority of my Toronto team, freaked out that I was leaving the country, and like one by one dropped like flies.
Yeah. And
I remember I was shattered. I was destroyed. My team, these people that I've worked with, and I also am a firm believer that everything happens divinely, exactly as it should. And I remember working with a healer at the time who said to me, let the walls crumble. You can't build the Empire State Building on top of a shack. You need to let the walls crumble. You need to let it be demolished and rebuild. And I sat in my backyard. There's a lake behind my backyard. I mean, in Toronto, you think a lake is like huge. Here, they're ponds, but they're called lakes.
Yeah.
And I could hear the water, and the sun was on my face, and I was ugly crying. And I just looked at the palm trees. I took a deep breath, and I thought, wow, it is so much easier for me to get through this here. Imagine sitting in my cold basement and everything crumbling. It would literally feel like my world was coming to an end, because having access to nature just allows us to be so much more grounded, but also present.
Yes.
And mindful. Yes. Like a mindfulness exercise is name 5 things you can see, 3 things you can hear, 2 things, like that whole exercise. When I'm sitting in my dark basement, I can see my computer. I can see the lights on like the
TV blinking.
Yes.
In the background.
But like here, I'm like, I can see the trees. I can see butterflies almost every day. Like I get to see butterflies every day.
Yeah.
I only get to see that when it's nice in Toronto. Exactly. And that's not to say that living in those places is bad, because it's not. It was time for both of us to be here. This is where our lives had to be.
Exactly.
And so I think I love what you said, because I resonate so much with that. And outside of the the move, which is incredibly stressful and allows for a lot of growth, outside of coming to a place where the culture is different, outside of having to build your business in a place where nobody knows your name. Nobody. I remember the way I built my business was, my kids, so can you listen to me for a second? Will you take a second to listen to me? Because you don't know me. And I don't want you, like I said to you, I don't want you to refer me business because you know my name.
Right.
I want you to refer me business because you trust me.
Absolutely. And of course I do. You know that.
And the feeling is so mutual.
Yeah.
Dana, I think South Florida is so lucky to have you.
Thank you.
I love hearing what you're doing. I think it's beautiful that it's validating for you to be here, because you're seeing it on your own.
Yes.
You're like that experience that I had where the little boy said, I did it. You're like, I can do this.
Yes.
I'm doing this and I did it. And I think I want you to sit in that for a minute because
Don't make me emotional.
I think it's very special to be able to sit in that. And I think that when you're like hitting the pavement and you're on the wheel and you're going, and although you have those moments of like, wow, I'm doing all these great things, I think it's easier for you, because I'm sure very similar to me, it's easier for you to see all the things your clients are doing.
Yes.
And all the things the teachers and the families and other people are doing. You're like, wow, look at all of them. But then it's like, hey, I did it.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a beautiful gift to give yourself for a minute, because what you did is so brave.
Thank you.
And not everyone can or chooses to do that. Like my husband always says to me, not everyone chooses this path, and it's not an easy one.
Right.
To go on your own is scary as shit. It is terrifying because there's no one to fall back on, and everyone else who works for you falls back on you.
Exactly. Yeah.
So then it's like, okay, this is all on me. And I remember when I was studying for my board exam, I was taking courses, and the courses that I took, the professor was brilliant, but terrified me because he spoke about how people have died because of improper practice of ABA.
Yes.
So when it came down to starting my business, my husband was like, you know, you have my support. And I was like, but what if I mess it all up? What if something terrible happens? And he was like, but it's not going to. You have seen what you can do. And like to be able to trust yourself, like you said, you have built this trust within yourself. Like, I can do it.
I also couldn't, you talk about your husband, I couldn't do it without my now husband. We were planning our wedding, we were building my business, and he continually, day in and day out, makes sure everything is going right on, you know, the business side of my business. He keeps me going and positive on days that I come home and I'm like, I'm so exhausted. Like, hello, hi, nice to see you. I need 10 minutes before, you know.
I can interact with another human.
I'm like, my words are no longer working right now. And he's been just so amazing with that. And I truly couldn't have done it without him. I could have done the clinical side, but having someone to support the business aspect and also support me as a person and, you know, hype me up when I need it. And also, you know, it's just, he's amazing. And that, you know, everything's been so good, and getting to meet you has been, you know, such a blessing, because I feel like you also really helped me with my business and, you know, talking to me and giving me the confidence. Like when I first met you, I had maybe one client, and now I have a bunch, and I just hired my first contractor.
Yay!
Yes, she started last week. And it's just, I feel like everything's slowly kind of falling into place, and it's just because of all the great people around me that have supported me.
Well, shout out to your amazing husband.
He's the best.
Before we go, I like to ask for my guests to leave the listeners with a question for them to sit with, or a statement for them to sit with. And I don't ever prime. It's always just whatever speaks to you. If there's something, whether that be a parent, or it be a practitioner, or it be an educator, or anyone who's just listening, what would you like to leave them with, to sit with?
I think that I would say, and this is to the parents that I work with and to all the parents out there that have a kid that's in any sort of service, whether it's OT, ABA, speech, you are doing great. It is not easy to be a parent. I don't have kids yet. I see how hard so many of you are working to do everything you can to make your kid's life better, and then wonder what you can do more, and call me with questions and send videos of progress, and just to give yourself a moment to say, I am doing everything I can, and it will work out in the way it's supposed to. And
so
that's
I guess
hard
similar
coming from a non-parent, but it's just something I see in the parents, that they work so hard.
So similar to what you're sitting with, which is like, look at what I'm doing. You want them to sit with that, which is a beautiful thing.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Dana. You are such a pleasure. You are a rock star. This was your first podcast, and I'm so happy that you are here with me. I'm honored. Thank you.